The night was quiet as I made my way through the dimly lit streets on my pizza delivery route. The order had come in late, and the destination was a secluded mansion at the edge of town, an address that sent a shiver down my spine. The mansion was a towering structure, its windows dark and foreboding. The driveway seemed to stretch on forever, and as I approached the front door, an unsettling feeling settled over me. Still, I had a job to do. I rang the doorbell, and the heavy wooden door swung open on its own with a creak that echoed through the mansion's cavernous halls. There was no one in sight, but a dim light beckoned from a room down the hallway. I cautiously entered the mansion, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The hallway was lined with old paintings, their subjects staring at me with hollow eyes. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional distant creak. The room with the dim light held an ornate dining table set for one, with a single place setting and a chair pulled out, as if waiting for a guest. But there was no one there, and the unsettling feeling grew stronger. As I placed the pizza on the table, I heard a soft whisper, a voice that seemed to come from nowhere. "You shouldn't have come." I turned, my heart pounding, but there was still no one in sight. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it was coming from beneath the table. I knelt down and peered under the tablecloth, and what I saw sent a chill down my spine, a pair of cold, lifeless eyes staring back at me. A pale, ghostly hand reached out and grasped my wrist. With a scream, I pulled away, stumbling back and knocking over a candlestick. The room was plunged into darkness, and in the blackness, I could hear a sinister laughter that seemed to surround me. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight, revealing the room in disarray. The dining table was now empty, and the mansion's eerie silence had returned. Terrified, I made a hasty exit, leaving the mansion behind in the darkness. I never found out who, or what, had been the uninvited guest at that macabre dinner table, and I knew I never wanted to return. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me, a chilling reminder that some doors should never be opened, and some deliveries should never be made. It was a typical Friday night, and I, a college student struggling to make ends meet, found myself behind the wheel of my trusty old car, delivering pizzas for the local pizzeria. Little did I know that this particular delivery would become a harrowing experience I'd never forget. The order came in just before midnight, and it was to a remote location on the outskirts of town. The address seemed peculiar, and I had never delivered to this part of town before, but I needed the tips, so I decided to take the chance. As I drove deeper into the night, the road grew increasingly desolate. Streetlights became sparse, and the only sound was the hum of my car engine. I checked the address again. It seemed to lead to an abandoned warehouse. I pulled up to the location, my headlights revealing a decrepit building covered in graffiti. My gut told me something was off, but I couldn't turn down the delivery now. I grabbed the pizza and approached the entrance cautiously. The entrance was ajar, and a flickering light beckoned from within. I cautiously stepped inside, my senses on high alert. The air was stale, and I could hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. As I ventured further into the building, I realized I had made a grave mistake. The place was a maze of dark corridors and hidden rooms, and I was hopelessly lost. Panic began to set in as I realized that this was no ordinary delivery. I called out, but there was no response. The footsteps grew closer, and I could hear hushed whispers, like a sinister chant. I knew I had to find a way out, but the warehouse seemed to shift and change around me, as if it had a malevolent will of its own. I stumbled into a room, and there, in the dim light, I saw them, shadowy figures, their faces obscured by masks, gathered around a table. On the table lay the pizza I had delivered, untouched. Their eyes turned to me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. They beckoned me closer, their whispers growing louder and more sinister. I tried to escape, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the room. As the figures closed in, Their intentions became clear. They were not interested in the pizza. They wanted something far more sinister, something I couldn't comprehend. I was in the clutches of a cult, and there was no way out. In a desperate act of survival, I lunged at the nearest figure, knocking them over and making a run for it. I raced through the maze of corridors, their chants and whispers following me. Finally, I burst through the entrance and into the night, gasping for breath. I jumped into my car and sped away from that cursed place, vowing never to return. To this day, I shudder at the memory of the Midnight Order, a delivery that took me to the edge of darkness and showed me the horrors that can lurk in the most unexpected of places. It was a chilly winter evening, and the streets were covered in a blanket of fresh snow. I was on my usual pizza delivery route when an order came in with an address that seemed out of place, an address that didn't appear on any map or GPS. The address was simply a set of coordinates, and curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow them, thinking it might be a prank or a wrong order. Little did I know that this decision would lead me to a nightmarish ordeal. As I drove deeper into the snowy wilderness, the world outside grew increasingly desolate. The road turned into a narrow, winding path, barely wide enough for my car. There were no signs of civilization, only tall trees and thick snowbanks. After what felt like hours of driving, I arrived at the coordinates and my heart sank. There was nothing there, a barren stretch of snow-covered forest with no indication of a delivery address. I double-checked the coordinates and called the number on the order, but there was no answer. Frustration turned to unease as I realized that I was truly alone in the middle of nowhere. I decided to turn back, but when I tried to start the car, the engine refused to respond. Panic set in as I attempted to call for help, only to discover that I had no cell signal. I was trapped, with no way to contact anyone. As I sat in the freezing car, the snowfall outside grew heavier, and the world turned into a white abyss. Time seemed to stretch, and the darkness of night descended upon the forest. That's when I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible over the wind. It seemed to come from the trees themselves, as if the very forest were speaking. I strained to listen, and the words became clear. "You should have never come here." I looked out the car window, and my blood ran cold. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, moved among the trees. They seemed to materialize from the snowflakes, their eyes fixed on me with an otherworldly glow. Desperation gripped me, and I forced the car door open, stepping out into the snow. The figures drew closer, their voices growing louder, their intentions unknown. I trudged through the snow, my heart pounding, and the figures followed, their whispers filling the air. I stumbled upon a small cabin, its door ajar, and without thinking, I rushed inside. The cabin was dimly lit, with a fire crackling in the hearth. It seemed abandoned, a relic from a bygone era. I locked the door and tried to catch my breath, but the whispers persisted, now coming from inside the cabin. I realized I was not alone. There, in the corner, sat an old man, his eyes filled with a haunting sadness. He spoke in a voice that seemed to echo with centuries of sorrow, revealing the truth of the vanishing address. He had been trapped here for centuries, his soul bound to this desolate place, and I had unwittingly joined him. The figures outside were his fellow spirits, and they hungered for the living. As the night wore on, I listened to the old man's tale, knowing there was no escape. We were all prisoners of the vanishing address, doomed to wander the snowy forest for eternity. To this day, I remain trapped in that cabin, a lost soul in the endless winter, haunted by the whispers of the vanishing address and the spirits that dwell within.